Hello. Hi, everybody. So I'm just letting you know we're going to get started in about 10 minutes here. For anybody that didn't get the memo, the washrooms are just right here below that green sign. And there's some glasses that you can get water from the kitchen, also to the left, to my left here. But yeah, we'll get started in about 10 minutes, so it's a good time to maybe grab some water or use the washroom or whatever have you. Welcome. So thank you all very much for coming out to this SEAS event, Conflict and Cancel Culture on the Left. My name is Marcus. I'm a member of the board of directors of SEAS, and I'm here to call us to order and give you a little context as to why we are hosting this. So before I start, we like to have Indigenous Solidarity Statement, a land acknowledgement, but in order to break from the performative nature of these, we've also started to pair them with more of an action statement, a call to action. So we are meeting here on the unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation, but also there is, within the past month especially, it has escalated a campaign by the Mohawk Mothers, which I'm sure many of you in the audience know of, involving the Royal Victoria Hospital in McGill University, which is currently undergoing excavations and renovations, and the Mohawk Mothers group believes, with evidence, that there are victims of the MK Ultra project, which was essentially McGill University in the 50s and 60s, developed what has become the International CIA Torture Handbook by experimenting on people, many of whom were indigenous. There's 3 different dogs that have confirmed the scent of human remains within the excavated materials with a success percentage of 99.94, but this has not been acted on, and we encourage all of you to sign the petition, get informed. You can Google Mohawk Mothers. There's multiple petitions around, and we encourage action on that. So, turning to the matter at hand, so why are we here? Well, specifically here at St. Jack's, it's a wonderful community center, and we certainly hope thank them for hosting us tonight. But more specifically, why are we, SEAS, Solidarity Economy Incubation for Zero Emissions, a group of cooperative entrepreneurs hosting an event on cancel culture and the left? So I'm here to read, as a member of the board, a letter that was written and approved by the SEAS Board of Directors. It was sent to the student media. It has not yet been published, but we hope to give you some context as to why that's the case. The SEAS mission statement, at least in part, involves promoting a culture of solidarity, but we have noted a profound deficit of solidarity at Concordia for quite some time. While conflicts are inevitable, we've observed a troubling trend of extreme conformity replacing healthy disagreement. These trends are antithetical to building community and undermine the left's ability to organize. We have come to understand this trend as cancel culture on the left. We define it as follows. Cancellation is a targeted campaign of harassment, misrepresentation, and social exclusion that marks a person as undeserving of empathy and denies them the right to defend themselves against accusations. It becomes a social crime to associate with the canceled person, and everyone in the canceled person's life, from acquaintances to colleagues to their partner, experience coercion to cut ties. Cancel culture exists in different forms across the political spectrum. Conformity is enforced through frequent cancellations, leading to the erosion of trust and critical thinking, and resulting in increased hypervigilance and self-censorship. On the left, cancel culture acts as an enforcer to uphold adherence to neoliberal social justice orthodoxies and often relies on essentialist or identitarian assumptions. The Concordia student community experiences cancellations on a regular basis. This has led to the painful ostracization of people who have poured their hearts and souls into building this community. The most tragic example in recent memory involves one of our co-founders to whom we devote this event, Benjamin Prunty. Ben was a charismatic leader with a clear and deep sense of compassion who played an outsized role in shaping the Concordia community. Following his time as president of the CSU, he was subject to a vicious smear campaign with no clear or consistent basis that saw him disempowered and eventually ostracized. Having his support removed and experiencing a long-term decline in his mental health, he took his life on November 1st, 2020. SEAS, along with most of the projects that form our network, could not have existed without his dedication, brilliance, and love. Ben's passing left an enormous collection of organizers in mourning. He was known in both French and English communities and by people of all backgrounds, but his story is one of many, both within the Concordia community and beyond. We dream of a campus and of a movement of the left more generally that is vibrant, diverse, supportive, and humanizing. We seek to break the chain of toxicity that has anchored us in a state of permanent distrust and demobilization, while opening discussion for systematically reducing harm. There is no greater challenge to the ravaging forces of colonial capitalism colonial capitalist ecocide than the grassroots power of community organizing. And the stakes, as we all know, have never been higher. And so 3 years and 2 days after his passing, we dedicate this event to the memory of Benjamin Prunty, in the recognition of the many others whose stories remain untold, and in the hopes of reforging a culture of solidarity at Concordia. It is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator for the evening, Jessica Cabana. So Jess has been a force at Concordia for well over a decade, and through her tireless activism, she helped shape the Concordia campus, co-founding several cooperative and nonprofit organizations along the way, including SEAS, where she holds a seat on our board. So Jess has been a pillar of any community that she chooses to involve herself in, and has dedicated her work, and maybe pretty much her entire social life as well, to uplifting people with a passion and insightful empathy. So please join me in welcoming our moderator for the evening, my former mentor and dear friend, Jessica Cabana.
Testing, 1, 2. Thank you, Marcus. Hi, everyone. How's everybody doing? Yeah, all right. It's really nice to be able to see everyone's faces. Also, if you can't hear because of the microphone or there's anything, just don't be shy to mention something. So we're here today. Most of us probably are here because things get personal. We organize, we care about the things that we organize with, and sometimes there are conflicts. Sorry, I'm still adjusting to the mic. I feel like no matter how far I put it, it's still really loud. Is it me? No? Okay, sounds good. So we're here today. We have these amazing people, and so just to go back to what I was saying before I got distracted by my own voice, when we organize, it gets personal. Sometimes we get into conflicts with people, and these can turn into cancellation campaigns. They can turn into many different ripple effects that destroy people's mental health, destroy people's connections to other people, communities, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. And the people that we have on the stage think about this a lot. I'm really grateful to be here. We have Kai Cheng, who has written 2 great books, I Hope We Choose Love, A Trans Girl's Notes from the End of the World, and Falling Back in Love with Being Human. Also has really great infographics online on their Instagram, by the way, if ever you wanted to go take a look. If you could give a warm clapping just to welcome her. Thank you. They are great. Clementine Morrigan and Jay both host the podcast Fucking Cancelled. Has anybody here ever listened to Fucking Cancelled? Yeah, all right. Thanks here. And it's also both of your first event here in Montreal on this topic. So altogether, I mean, for you as well, I'm sure. So altogether, it's one of the first times we're going to be discussing this in, the belly of the beast, as to say. The way that it's going to be structured, there's going to be just a few questions. We're going to let the experts kind of talk about the things that they know. And we're going to be, a first person's going to be talking, and then we're just going to kind of bounce off what is being said. Very informal gathering. And at the end, there'll be a period for questions. So that's how we're going to be structuring the talk. So let's get into it. What is cancel culture? This is kind of why we're here today. Who wants to start with? Shall we start with Clementine?
Okay, so thank you guys all so much for coming, first of all. I know that we felt really nervous about doing this event in Montreal because this is the city, like Jay and I live in Montreal. Kai Cheng used to live in Montreal but escaped to Toronto. And Montreal's a pretty cancel-y city. I don't know if you guys know that. And so doing this in this city where we live is kind of scary. Jay and I, we went on tour with our podcast, and we did, 12 events or something across the United States of America. So we've done events and talked about this topic in public a number of times. And so, we've found the courage to do that. But this is our first time doing it in our home city of Montreal. And so I just wanted to like acknowledge that like it takes some courage to do this, and also it takes courage for all of you guys to be here, because this is a topic that is controversial, and you can actually be canceled for attending an event on cancel culture. You know, I don't know if anybody, you know, might have slid into anybody's DMs to like let them know that this event was problematic, but I'm sure it happened, right? And so I just wanted to say that first and foremost. But to get into the question, what is cancel culture? Marcus like read out a definition, but I think we will kind of just get into that. Basically, in order to understand what cancel culture is, you first have to understand what a cancellation campaign is, because a cancel culture is a culture in which cancellation campaigns happen a lot. So, do you want to jump in and talk about what a cancellation campaign is?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the definition that Marcus gave was really good, but can you hear me? Oh yeah, okay. Sorry, it just sounds weird up here because of the echoes. Yeah, I mean, I think that like basically we all understand what it is. We like to make a distinction between what kind of like right-wing psychos are constantly freaking out about, which is, you know, like random like celebrities getting in shit for like saying something stupid, versus the vast majority of cancellations, which are of totally regular people who have like no special resources and just get on the wrong side of this phenomenon, right? And, you know, it's a situation in which people can lose enormous segments of their security, their personal security, right? Like in the sense that you can lose your friends, sometimes your housing, your job, and any ability to retain connections with people in really severe cases, right? In less severe cases, it can be, you know, not as intense, but still really brutal for people's mental health and their ability to carry on, right? And so I think that that's what a cancellation is, but we also have to talk about, like as Clementine was pointing at, the difference between just a cancellation or a cancellation campaign and cancel culture, and there's a reason why we use the term. And I think that it's important to point out that cancel culture, and okay, I'm just gonna make a super brief digression. Some people like think that we shouldn't use the term because, again, right-wing psychos constantly talking about it. But it is a term that makes sense to use, and just because right-wing psychos talk about it doesn't mean that we can't, you know? But yeah, like essentially what happens is that we get caught in this, this situation where there is a culture of fear around speaking about certain topics, saying what you really think about things, a culture where you are, where it makes a lot of sense to fear your own friends and community, because you, even if it doesn't happen to you, you can see what happens to others, right? And so a lot of people who have been around in left-wing or queer communities have seen friends of theirs or acquaintances have their lives like totally fucking destroyed over often like really innocuous things, right? Which is a sobering thing to happen to you when you see that. And it can really dissuade people from being themselves, from speaking truthfully, and from being involved in political actions in the first place, right? So I'll pass it on now.
Yeah, I think I don't have a ton to add except that the practice of social shunning for the purpose of like building like supposed unity among communities like fairly old, actually. Like we were doing this before social media. I think like the contemporary form that we call call-out culture or cancel culture today, like has some roots in practices in activist communities and religious communities and other forms of like ideologically based community for a long time. And some of the features that I find really worrying about like activist cultures today are those that mimic the features of social panic, where we're constantly looking within ourselves and between one another for signs of impurity or signs of dissent from like some kind of like from like an imaginary socio-political ideal. And those signs of dissent are then taken as like a cause for punishment. And there's like a sort of terror that builds that like there is like an imaginary predator lurking among us, lurking on the edge of the community, lurking at the heart of the community, and that the way to be safe and protect ourselves from that imaginary predator is to expel the predator. And because the predator is imaginary, we're always finding a new one. This dynamic is something that we can see in the homophobic, anti-gay and lesbian culture of the 80s and 90s following the rise of the AIDS crisis. We see it earlier on as well in different forms of racist, violent cultures. The question I think that I really want to pose to communities of activists are to what extent are we willing to sacrifice an actual culture of freedom for the culture of imaginary safety, which is based upon the practice of exiling.
One thing I just want to add to the description of cancellation that we were discussing is just that I think it's really important to emphasize that the way that cancellation functions is it makes empathy for the canceled person a social crime. And I really want to highlight that because basically, even in cases where, it goes very, very far and the person is being extremely harassed, they have lost almost all their friends, because you have to understand that when a person is marked as canceled, the harassment does not just go to the canceled person, but it goes to every single person who is associated with that person in any way. So if you are canceled, every friend of yours is going to start getting messages being like, why aren't you holding this person accountable? Why are you friends with this person? And there is a huge social pressure for you to withdraw friendship from your friend, right? Everyone in your life, when you're canceled, is experiencing this kind of social pressure to abandon you and to join in on the harassment campaign. Everyone from your closest friends to strangers on the internet who might follow you on social media, people will be sliding into their DMs being like, I noticed that you follow this person. How problematic. Do you care to defend yourself against that, right? And there will even be situations where people will then start openly harassing people for not abandoning them, right? So people will make posts on the internet and be like, I see that I have 10 followers in common with this person. And they will tag the people who are still following the canceled person and threaten them, right? And so it creates this huge culture of fear where people just don't want to associate with someone who's being canceled, regardless of whether they believe the accusations against them, regardless of whether or not they think that what is happening is wrong, regardless of whether or not they think that it is going too far. And this has very serious material consequences on people's lives, right? People will make fun of the work that we do and say oh, some people said some mean things about you online. That's not what we're talking about. People lose their housing, right? I don't know if you know, but queer people tend to live in a house with 10 other people. When you're canceled, you can get kicked out of that house, right? Because it's a social crime to be friends with you. So it's definitely a social crime to live with you. And so people lose their housing, people lose their jobs. Cancellation campaigns sometimes directly compel people to contact employers, right? And not just that, but now it's on Google. So if you Google the person's name, all of these accusations come up about them, and these accusations have not been verified. There has been no trial, there is no lawyer, there is no right to defend yourself, and many of the accusations are totally false and made up. There's an entire broken telephone game on the internet, right, where accusations just get passed along by people who have no idea anything about the actual situation, especially if you have some kind of online following. It gets crazy, right?
Yeah, and I think it's really worth pointing out that one of the major features of this phenomenon is that it does largely take place or really take off on social media typically, right? And so there are some effects that flow out of this. One is that it tends to be completely decentralized. Sometimes there's a core crew of people who really make it their business to fuck with you or something, right? But very often it can get kind of diffuse just through the internet. And because it's the internet and people are not speaking face to face and there's no way to verify anything or whatever, there will be allegations or accusations or claims about people that can start morphing, right? And there's a way in which this works that makes it so that, if I say that you suck and you're really annoying and I don't like you, that's not very juicy, who cares? But if I say something juicy about you, that you're, you routinely target like queer people because you hate them or something, then that is much more likely to get amplified and passed on because it's juicy, right? And that process will repeat because, again, this doesn't take place just once, it takes place like in an ongoing way. And as a result of that process, like very often within a couple of years, the claims that are being made about someone will change into something like unrecognizable because people pass on the juicy shit and don't pass on like, judicious, like well thought out like arguments or claims, right? And so that's one of the effects of all of this happening on social media. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, something I wanted to add to that, like, I think a reason that happens is we live in like a culture with a deficit of empathy. I think that's like a dominant culture. I think that's an activist subculture or a queer culture. We live in a deficit of empathy. Sarah Schulman, who wrote "Conflict is Not Abuse," another controversial text, talks about this in terms of people seeking care. When we make the claim that we have experienced everyday hurt or an ordinary pain, day-to-day conflict, it isn't treated seriously. Like in most cultures, like we're like, okay, well, yeah, you had a difficult moment. Carry on with your life. Be more resilient. We do live in a culture that enjoys sensationalism and that responds very powerfully to narratives of trauma. I think because we also live in a traumatogenic culture. And this creates this strange situation where we are incentivized to escalate our narratives of normative conflict or day-to-day pain in order to be heard, in order to be taken seriously. And I think like important inquiry there is what might be possible if we lived in a culture where more empathy was available. We took people's day-to-day pains and conflicts seriously so that it wasn't necessary or it didn't feel necessary to escalate in order to access care. And then also maybe ask ourselves some questions about why we find like narratives of trauma, narratives of abuse, sensational stories, more entertaining or like more exciting to pass around in our communities. As opposed to like the more mundane stories about how people need their day-to-day needs met.
Yeah, and I think that the point that you make about empathy is so important. And what I was saying about it becoming a social crime to have empathy for the canceled person, the reason I want to drive this point home so strongly is that it goes to really disturbing lengths where a person can literally be at risk of suicide and can be communicating that and can be saying, I am scared that I am going to die. Because you have to understand that like any one of the things that happens to you when you're being canceled is a major stressor. Like if you go and talk to therapists about major stressors, losing your job, losing your housing, losing your friends, being harassed, like all of these things on their own would be a major stressor. But to have a number of those or all of those things happening to you at once is a major, major attack on a person's mental health, right? And so people are often very like suicidal when they're being canceled. And so they are literally afraid that they're going to die often. And if they try to say that, if they try to say like, I am scared that I might take my life because I feel like I have no hope for the future, because that's the other thing about cancellation is that it extends indefinitely into the future, right? There's no way to come back from it. So I'm not allowed to do any of the things that bring me joy. I'm constantly going to be harassed. I have to have this conversation with every person that I meet now to let them know that if they look me up on the internet, they're going to find all this stuff about me. Like it really sends people into a dark place. And if they say, I need help, I'm scared, what do you think the response is? People say, you're centering yourself, how dare you? This is you causing further harm. And if anyone says, hey guys, could we just slow down and remember that this is a person? And that this person is suffering and that they need help right now. And like, regardless of if the accusations are true or not, we are actually like endangering a person's life with how thoroughly we are dehumanizing them. And you're not allowed to say that because if you say that, you yourself put yourself up for potentially being canceled, for standing up for someone who has been marked as not deserving of human empathy. And so for that reason alone, I think that cancel culture is something that we need to take really, really seriously. Because it is wrong to dehumanize and socially isolate people to the point where they would actually consider taking their own life.
Thanks for that. I mean, cancel culture came out of something, though, out of a need. And so I'm kind of wondering, why do you think it exists, and what is wrong with it right now? So it came out for, it started happening for a reason. If you want to start, or we can go around.
Sure, I can try. I feel like I gave a good shot at it already with the whole deficit of empathy thing. It's a good term. Remember that one while I'm fumbling for more stuff. Yeah. I think a while ago I started asking myself why are queer people so mean to each other? And then I wrote an article called "Why Are Queer People So Mean to Each Other?" Look it up. I kind of I stand by that. I always asking myself, why am I so mean to other queers? Why are other queers so mean to me? And at least in my experience, what I see is, when I say we live in a traumatogenic culture, what I mean is we live in a situation where most of us are experiencing many, many, many kinds of exploitation, deprivation, and stress on a day-to-day basis. I think those of us who live on the left can agree on that one thing, hopefully, and then there are many different ways that those stressors play out based on who you are, or how you're being treated within the social hierarchy. And I think that's something that collective trauma does to us, is it makes it really difficult to think in terms of complexity, to think in terms of maybe this person has some bad stuff about them, and also maybe they are good. It also makes it really hard to feel safe in the presence of somebody who is doing things we don't like, and it becomes really hard to distinguish between things we don't like and things that are causing harm. There's also maybe a bit of a strange thing happening with social media that allows us to accrue social status by making claims of harm, or being a person who speaks about those things. But I think at its base, I come back to this idea of we don't receive enough care, we don't receive the care that we want to and need to, and also we are scared. When I think about what I perceive as the parallels to cancel culture in more dominant culture or mainstream culture, I really think about security and security culture. The way that people will say, oh, we need to remove homeless people or marginally housed people from the streets. I don't want to see them, or I don't want to have them on the subway because it makes me feel afraid. I'm at risk. And what actually ends up happening is we end up enacting harm with our power onto people who are socially undesirable. And when I think about cancel culture or call-out culture, I don't know, still uncomfortable with the terminology, I really think about how we respond to fear by trying to create more classes of social undesirables and enacting power onto them. And I think it feels good. I think there's a power that comes from being oh, that person is the predator in the shadows, and if we got rid of them, then I would feel safe. And also maybe I'm a hero for pointing it out. And I think the cycle is kind of addictive that way. Hard to break because of that.
I think one thing that goes into all of this, and I'm going to sort of misquote Adolf Reed here, who's a thinker I really admire, where he just says that basically we're in a situation where we have tons and tons of leftists, but almost no left. And what that means is just that we lack an organized capacity to enact our political goals. There's lots of people with lots of goals, but very little way to enact them. And we're out here sort of witnessing these really traumatically terrifying events that are going on, and the existential threat of the fucking planet not being habitable anymore. And we feel, this frantic urge to do something, right? And yet, there's very little that we can do as individuals often, There's many, many leftists who are not part of any organization. They're not connected to any real community. And what we're, the only kind of options that a lot of people have is to vote for one of two evil, horrible psychopaths every 4 years or something, right? And so people want to do something, but they're left with few options. But that urge doesn't go away, right? And I think that seeking out and destroying the heretics within the movement is that urge being sort of sublimated into a different kind of action, And people get to feel like they're doing something useful and important, and making things safer. while in reality accomplishing almost nothing other than sort of like crushing our ability to organize effectively and creating a culture of extreme fear and paranoia. And yeah, I think that that's one of the places that it comes from, not the place that most sort of proponents of it would say that it comes from, but I think that it's an important thing to bear in mind when we think about it.
Another thing I want to point out is there's a lot of people who will say cancel culture doesn't exist, it's just consequences. And so I want to just respond to that claim, because the thing is that if it were just natural, organic consequences, it wouldn't need to be enforced, right? So it's true. If I'm friends with someone and that person treats me badly, I absolutely have the right to no longer want to be their friend. You know, of course, I think we should try to work through conflicts, but sometimes we do need to end relationships, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you decide that you don't want to be friends with someone, you're free to not want to be friends with them. That would be like a natural consequence. My friend like insults me or keeps being really rude to me all the time, and I say, you know, I don't really like being your friend because you keep being rude to me all the time. And so I end the relationship. That would be a natural consequence. But that is not the same thing as me then going through my now ex-friend's social media and contacting every single person who is also that person's friend and telling them that they also have to end the relationship, right? That would be me using coercion to attempt to make everybody else have the same boundary that I have. And so that is the difference, because if it were just a natural withdrawal of support, we wouldn't need cancel culture. We wouldn't need to be harassing and frightening people into withdrawing support because they would just do it anyway. And so that's a thing that I think that people miss when talking about this. And I think, like, relating to what Jay was saying, it's part of this idea that, like, we have turned ourselves into, like, brands. And so we feel like a person is like a brand, and we're, like, boycotting the brand, right? And we can, like, withdraw our support from the brand, and then we're doing something political, we're doing something important. But that's actually a person, and the person needs to have friends, because we're social animals who need to have friends. So just because you don't want to be friends with someone doesn't mean that somebody else doesn't want to be friends with them.
And I think the point that Kai Cheng was making about safety is really important here too. Because I think, okay, so like the need that is like allegedly addressed by campaigns of cancellation or disposability or whatever you want to call it, or accountability, is to try to produce safety by taking people who have been deemed unsafe and removing them, right? So, you know, maybe if that was true and actually how it worked, you could, you know, begin to make a case for it. But we do have to ask ourselves if that process, A, is what's actually happening, and B, is effective at doing what it claims to do, right? So, like, well, I'll ask you guys, like, do you think that that is what's happening, and do you think that it's making people safer?
Oh, you're looking at me, okay. You know, as we were speaking, I like noticed like myself like really digging deep, right? Like, if I take like a compassionate view on like where these social dynamics come from and like what the worst case scenarios are, I think about an experience I had recently actually, like where oh God, how to put this in like an anonymous way? Okay, I was dating a dude and he treated me in a really bad way. Raise your hand if that's happened to you before. Okay, yeah, raise your hand if you've done that before. Okay, whatever. Canceled. Out. Like really, really badly. Like kind of like on the, like in that ambiguous zone where I was like, how bad is this? How harmed have I been? Like, it was serious. I was also about to, like in the next week, put out a book about forgiveness. And I was like, you know, damn. I tried all my conflict resolution like tricks on this person, you know. I was like, let me be vulnerable and tell you I'm feeling some pain and I'm wondering if you'd like to speak to me about it. You know, he said yes, but then, you know, didn't pick up the call or whatever. You know, asked for conversation, he didn't want to do it. And I, like, it's funny, having talked about, like, transformation and, like, forgiveness for a really long time, I still felt the, like, the pain and, like, the rage and the helplessness of, like, I don't know exactly what's happened to me, and I don't think I would put it in the bucket of like being grievously harmed or traumatized. But a shitty dude treated me badly, and there's nothing I can do about it if I don't resort to revenge, you know? And you know, this is like a kind of like a more lighthearted example. But there are, of course, examples where the shitty dude or the shitty person, whoever it is, has done something grievously harmful, has done something traumatic, has done something just awful, right? We still do live in a culture where like interpersonal harm or intimate harm doesn't have really many great options for us to pursue. And I think what has emerged, you know, in recent times is like, oh, like actually maybe there is this other option where we could pursue revenge, and it could be effective revenge, or accountability. We could get consequences going. We could protect other people by letting people know this person is so shitty in their intimate life or their friendship life or their interpersonal life. And there's like an allure to that, and I think also like a truth to that I don't want to ignore in like this kind of conversation, where for a long time, a lot of us have felt powerless in our intimate lives to respond to bad treatment or to like actual grievous harm in a way that is effective. And I think, you know, when I really search for like what is the most compelling argument that this like kind of dynamic that we're talking about like could be good or should be used, it's that one. And I really want to ask, you know, like the vengeful me of the past or the vengeful people out there or like people who are demanding consequences, like, is punishment actually something that is going to bring about the world that we want? Is punishment going to bring us the treatment that we deserve in our intimate lives? Is that kind of action, like that kind of consequence, like really in alignment with the values of the world that we want to create for ourselves? Is that going to make our, you know, is that going to make our lives more fun and sexy? Like, I don't think so. And I think that realization is a really sad one. I think it's a really hard one for a lot of people because that kind of action, like the cancel action, the call out action, is maybe the first time or like the only time that many of us have felt power over our intimate lives. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think one of the reasons people get really mad at me all the time is because I complicate what it means to stand up for survivors, because we like to, in social justice culture, act like groups have a singular voice, right? And so survivors have a singular voice. And I'm not saying the things that people think survivors should say, but I'm definitely a survivor, and being a survivor has been like the fundamental defining experience of my life, because like many survivors who were abused as children, I got complex PTSD, and then I had a crazy life, and many horrible things happened to me, including domestic violence, very serious domestic violence in my early 20s. And there's a few things that I always want to say, because I actually feel like cancel culture appropriates a set of language and a way of talking about very serious violence and abuse, and then uses it for interpersonal conflict. And this offends me as a survivor, okay? So when I was in my early 20s, my boyfriend put my body through a wall. Like, he broke the wall open by putting my body through it, okay? I was seriously abused by this guy, and I was terrified of him, and he stalked me. And it went through the criminal justice system, and there was trials, and there was a whole thing, okay? The idea that cancel culture would have been an effective tool for me in getting safety is an absolute joke, okay? I was advised by a lawyer not to get a restraining order against him because that would enrage him, and also because weirdly they would tell him where I live so that he would know where not to go. So, like, the idea that if I were to make a website or a series of Instagram posts calling him out and demanding that, you know, we do all the things that we just talked about that cancel culture is to this guy, that would make me safer, is absolutely factually incorrect. It would enrage him, and he would come after me and try to kill me. So the idea that is like a useful tool for survivors of very serious things like domestic violence, I've always found to be insulting and laughable, because I don't actually think that it is, first of all. But I agree with what you're saying, Kai Cheng. Like, the feeling of powerlessness that you feel when you experience things like that is fucking huge. And that is a very serious conversation that we need to be having, because domestic violence, intimate partner violence, sexual violence, like, these things are happening in our communities, and they are very serious. And I do want to be having serious conversations about how to address very serious things like this. And I feel that cancel culture is sucking up all the air in the room and preventing us from having real serious conversations about how to deal with actual serious violence. And I don't think that cancel culture is a useful tool in that case. So I want to say that. And I also want to say, you know, like, because what do we do? That's always the question. People are like, well, what do you do? And I mean, in my case, the police got involved. And in Canada, like, you will be subpoenaed to your own rape trial. I don't know if you know that, but if you don't actually press charges in Canada, they subpoena you, and you have to go. And, like, I went through the criminal justice system. Did that make me safer? No. Because, you know, the criminal justice system is not the same as cancel culture, but it also is a very fucking dehumanizing, traumatizing thing. And he went to jail. He was further traumatized in jail, and then he got out. And he continued to be a scary guy who was traumatizing people and stalking me. And so, yeah, like, that helplessness and that powerlessness is very big. And we do need to talk about, how do we protect each other? How do we keep ourselves safe? How do we intervene on violence? How do we transform the conditions that actually led my ex-partner to be that violent? You know? Because he's a survivor too. And so, like, part of what cancel culture does, it has a similar logic to jails. Because it's like, we'll just put them over there, right? And there's this mythology with both cancel culture and jails that you can get rid of the problem by getting rid of the person. But unless you kill the person or you lock them in solitary confinement, both of which are wrong, unless you do one or either of those things, that person will continue to be around other people. Because when you put people in jail, there's other people in jail, okay? And they're traumatizing each other because they're all super traumatized and now they've been locked in jail together, right? So it doesn't get rid of the problem, it doesn't solve the problem, it puts them all in jail and they traumatize each other more. And with cancel culture, okay, say we want to make a safe community, so we drive this person out of the community. Where are they gonna go? Somewhere else. They're gonna go somewhere else.
Yeah, I think it's also worth pointing out, okay, so people have this idea that most people who are canceled are, you know, scary guys, a drummer in a metal band or like some shit like this, you know, who did something really bad and then refused accountability, and then, you know, you have to make everybody safe. In reality, I mean, like, yeah, like Clementine was saying, we did like 14 events through the US, and all these people would come to our events to hear us talk and to talk with us and stuff. And, you know, very high proportion of brutally canceled people, right? And they're all like, you know, they're all like these like 21-year-old like queer non-binary kids, right? Like it's because that's the kind of like community that this tends to happen in, like most brutally, right? And keeping that in mind, we also have to remember this other thing, which is that like within the culture that we're talking about, these campaigns get started on the basis of just like allegations, right? With obviously like there's no need to like prove anything, and there's no way to defend yourself even if there was. And here's the thing, anyone can say anything about anyone at any time, you know? So bearing that in mind, we have to remember that people now have a tool to control and punish other people very easily if they are mad, you know? And if you believe that there is, you know, a class of people who are called abusers who will stop at nothing to control and punish people that they're angry at, then you have to remember that like this phenomenon that we've allowed to grow among us can be used very fucking easily to abuse people, right? Like, how could it not be? Why would it not be? And so, yeah, I mean, it's just like another thing to point out when we're talking about whether or not this makes anyone safer, to have a system by which people can be dehumanized and traumatized with absolutely no process and no need for anyone to prove anything, right? It's fucking worrisome. So I'll just leave it there.
Sounds good. I did appreciate how there was like the connection between the judicial system, how it works, and how it's like we're trying to build this alternative for it. And it's going to be a process, want it or not. And I think when we're bringing back to creating safer spaces, creating spaces with more empathy, like I think these are the words and the intentions that we want behind whatever we're trying to build. And yeah, I just wanted to voice that. And I think that in a way it's more systemic when it looks at people that have caused harm, like that have experienced trauma and had harm caused to them are often the ones that will do it again. And so it just like kind of breaks the cycle. So I wanted to like pinpoint the thing that I feel like all three of you had mentioned. So it's, yeah, it's really pertinent. I guess now that we've discussed a bit more what cancel culture is and why it exists, the last is kind of like two questions, because like in our discussions, I feel like we touched on two things. One of them was, why does it matter to you and what can we do instead? And I feel like you mentioned a bit why it matters to you in different ways, but if there's anything you want to add, and then what are things that we can do instead of cancel culture to create safe spaces, to make sure that people can heal. And yeah.
We're so polite. Why does it matter to me?
Yeah, and all three of you really try to build spaces of compassion and spaces of love. Like, yeah, like it's in the books that you write, in the zines that you publish, and also in other writings and the discussions that you have, either online and in person. You foster these kinds of spaces. So yeah, what can we do, and even what are you already doing? Because you are doing things.
I make infographics.
You do make infographics, and they're great.
Very socially impactful. It matters to me. I mentioned I still have a little bit of fear about saying the words cancel culture. It feels like a term that is forbidden to me. I've been trying to talk about this phenomenon for about 10 years. Various infographic-y or writing articles kinds of ways, and use different terms for it. I think call-out culture remains a popular term. Disposability culture remains popular, in some ways as well. But what I really think about is in all of those attempts to speak about this issue, I think about being a little baby queer in my late teens and early 20s in this city. I'm getting a little choked. Yeah. I was a baby queer. And I used to have friends, and I had a lot of friends who were all the identities, right? Trans, queer, racialized, white, whatever. And I saw that we were hurting each other really, really badly. And not just in the cancel culture way, there was also lots of just bad dating, and then there was very serious bad harm, also very serious abuse, right? That was happening. And these things were sort of happening at the same time. I could go to a queer party and watch, a friend beat up his boyfriend. I could be visiting a friend's house and watch them throw their partner down the stairs. And we would be surrounded by queer social justice people, and no one would do anything. And that was mysterious to me, but I could explain it with feminist theory or whatever. I'd be okay, well, this is rape culture or whatever, abuse culture. But then also at the same time, in these same communities, the same places, people would be talking all about the importance of accountability and how important it was to not let this particular individual rent a room in a house anywhere in the city because they were so dangerous. And I was how is this happening? It's driving me insane. Watching this, the violence happen, and then watching the punishment happen, and they're not seeming to be connected in any kind of way. And the people who really seemed to be most affected were the ones who were already socially vulnerable, the people without money, the people who were trans, the people who were trans women particularly. There's a thing in my life where I just keep watching trans women, lots of trans women of color, get called out, go crazy, and disappear. And I kind of don't care. I care, but lots of them do crazy bad things because the world is a crazy bad place. You have to do crazy bad things to survive sometimes, or sometimes you just make a mistake, a huge mistakes, whatever. Yes. And I still wish those people were still around. That's why this is important to me, and I think what we can do about it is there is the individual culture of empathy, I think I want to build. Like this idea of like, could we like take a pause, you know? Like, could we slow it down? Like really ask ourselves the question, like, what is it going to create the world that I want to live in? The world I want to live in is a world where we can like really hold the people who have been fucked up and are doing fucked up things because of that. What's going to create that? And like if we keep coming back to that question as we build the spaces, maybe that changes something. I also believe in like systemic things, like the prison system and the criminal justice system is really never doing what we need it to do. We need another system, but that other system isn't like ad hoc vigilante justice. You know? Like maybe that other system should have some oversight. Maybe that other system needs process. So, you know, this is kind of like the beginning of a thing. Like, what like in the perfect world, what does the process look like? Who is the overseer? What happens when somebody like receives an accusation and disagrees with it? What if two people have committed harm to one another at the same time? Like, actually, these are not impossible questions to answer. We treat them like they're impossible. They're not. Like, you could build a process for that. Like, the big question I think about doing that is like, how do we decenter punishment and vengeance, the idea that harm will make us safe in trying to do that? Okay, yeah, that's me.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, for me, like, you know, why do I care about this? Like, obviously there's a personal component, you know, because it's happened to me, but I mean, also I think, Clementine and I talk about this all the time, that we're in solidarity with fucking sketchy people. And I mean, for me, that comes out of like two places. One is being in AA for 10 years and watching fucking really sketchy people like get better and turn their lives around and like start to be like a lot more responsible and a lot more able to take care of themselves and others, right? Another is working in homeless shelters for years, which is like what I do as my day job. And you know, I'm helping people who have done all kinds of terrible, crazy shit because they're fucking, like, all fucked up, you know? And, like, are trying to survive in a world that is, like, constantly brutalizing them, right? And if I applied, like, these social justice rules to these people, like, would I have to, like, count up their fucking identities to decide if they're, like, allowed to do, like, certain amounts of crazy shit per day or something? Like, no, you know? Like, people who are living in, like, really difficult conditions and who are fucking sketchy, like, deserve care and support and my solidarity, right? And I care much more about their safety than I do about the safety of, like, you know, quivering university queers, like, sorry. And like, so when I think about like what it would mean to have like safe spaces, I'm like, for fucking who though, you know? Because like there's a lot of people out there who are not safe. They're never safe, you know, and they deserve safety as well. And if they walked into fucking Cuberg, they would get like kicked out, you know? And no offense to Cuberg. But yeah, so I don't know. I think like this is like a major thing for me. Is like when I look at like my, you know, I go to work. I work at a homeless shelter, deal with like really intense shit all day. And then maybe I go to like an AA meeting and hear about like more intense shit. And then I like go on the internet and see people just like freaking out about like, you know, political disagreements or like somebody like broke up with their partner or something. And I'm just like, I don't fucking care, you know. And as for like what to do about it, I mean, what to do about like trying to create safety and trying to, you know, create better spaces for us all to exist in. I mean, I think that if it was a simple question, we would have done it already, you know. But in general, I do really like to try to point to like actionable policy, right? Because honestly, like so many of these things are so big, they're so systemic, you know, that like we can't deal with it by sort of like pointing at random people and being like, you can't sit with us, you know? Like we have to be thinking about like, what produces violence? You know, is it that like some people are just like ontologically evil? Like, no, I mean, maybe there's like a small percentage of the population that are like sociopaths or something, right? But I'm not really talking about that. Like, I'm talking about the fact that there's like people have stories behind them, you know? Like people live through things that create them, that make them who they are, right? And those things don't just come out of a fucking vacuum. They're produced by like social conditions, right? This is like really, really basic, like a really, really basic Marxist understanding of the world, but like people are produced by the world that we live in. And so if we want to produce better people, we have to produce a better world. Like that's what we have to do first, you know? And a better world is not just one where we sort of like go around and police everyone, right? Like, because we're trying that and it's not fucking working. Like the cops aren't making anybody particularly safer, you know? A better world is one in which the conditions that produce violence have been eliminated, you know? And in particular, I'm talking about, you know, severe poverty, the kinds of trauma that come out of, you know, growing up in like a foster system that completely fails people, having like no resources, having like no help, having like a social state that is like that's been like gutted by neoliberals for the past like 50 years. All of these things are things that we can work on, right? And we'll do a lot more to produce safety than, like in the long run and like big picture, than going after individuals, you know? And it's not a satisfying answer, because it's very boring and slow and doesn't produce vengeance, you know? But if you want to ask like how we make the world safer for people, like I'm like, eliminate poverty, number one, you know? Yeah.
So for me, I think I care about this topic for two main reasons. The first is that I care about human beings point blank, and I believe that every single person deserves to have everything that they need to survive, and that includes social connection and belonging. And I believe that that is a fundamental human right, and all people deserve it. And so anything that is about trying to socially isolate people and drive them out of community and makes it a social crime to be their friend is not something that I can get behind. I don't know if you guys know this, but I myself am canceled. So I have personal experience with this topic, and I know how fucking bad it is. And also, due to the fact of being a canceled person who openly talks about this, canceled people talk to me all the time. And they tell me about what is happening to them, and they tell me about their suffering, and they tell me about how nobody fucking cares, and how they feel so fucking alone. And I have compassion for them. I care about their humanity. I don't want them to suffer. I want them to have what they need. I want us all to have what we need. So anything that is about dehumanization, I'm not behind it. I don't care. And that also goes to why I'm an abolitionist and why I don't believe in dehumanizing people who have committed serious crimes, because they still have humanity and we should still care about them. So that is just fundamental to me. Secondly, and this is very like, you know, like a strategic like element, I don't know if you know this, but the left is not very effective. We really struggle to achieve our goals. And that is very concerning for me because we have a lot of problems, a lot of social problems, right? We are literally here and we have like fucking climate change looming over us, and now Montreal wants to like get rid of buses that run like later at night. Like what the fuck is going on? You know? We are gonna we're gonna be cutting back on public transit. That's what's gonna be happening.
Yeah, in 2023.
In 2023, like when that would be, first of all, that's gonna suck for all of us because how are we supposed to get places, you know? And then secondly, it's like, you know, that's like the bare minimum for climate change. And are we gonna be able to effectively organize against this? Are we gonna be able to effectively organize against fucking anything? There are so many atrocities going on in the world. They are eroding public health care. They're privatizing it under our noses. Are we able to effectively organize against that? Or is somebody at the meeting really problematic? Right? And we are doing this all the time. And like one of the things that I do for free is I do consults with leftist organizers internationally who their organizations are being destroyed, either through internal conflict and internal cancellations happening between members, or because somebody in the community has decided that the organization or the activists themselves are all problematic and need to be canceled. And so many people who are trying to do necessary, important political work are not able to do it because we are spending all of our time attacking each other. And so this is very concerning for me from a political level because I want leftists to be able to organize. We need to do that. So I care about it for those reasons. And in terms of like what to do instead, I think that Jay and Kai Cheng did a really good job of talking about it. But it's like we need to meet people's needs. We need to have healthcare. We need to have housing. We need to get rid of poverty. If for those of us who really believe that cancel culture is for survivors, I would love us to pour even a fraction of this energy into trying to organize to make therapy free. I think that therapy should be covered as part of healthcare, and I think that it should be free. I think that that itself would do so much to end the cycle of violence, because people like my ex-partner who did that horrible shit to me, he's fucking traumatized and he needs help, and he's not able to access it, and so he's continuing the cycle of violence. So I really, really, really think that if we could actually organize and try to expand healthcare instead of like slowly privatizing it, that would go a really, really long way. And I just think that like cancel culture pretends to do like several different things all at once. It claims to create safety. It claims to produce responsibility in people who have caused harm. It claims to like facilitate healing like for the survivor. And it claims to deal with like interpersonal conflict. And I'm like, these are all different things and they all need answers. And it would be great if we could actually spend some time thinking very seriously and carefully about how to best do that. And I have ideas, like Jay and I have ideas, Kai Cheng has ideas, you know, we have a podcast, Kai Cheng is a prolific writer, like we've been sharing our ideas about what to do instead at length, but I also want to invite all of you to feel empowered to think about these questions yourself, because you are also capable thinkers. And so when people are like, Clementine, what should we do? I'm like, I don't know, what should we do, right? And I want you to think about that seriously and carefully, and I want you to try to come up with some answers to that question. And we will continue to also do that work, but also please join us.
Yeah, can I just say one more thing? I think like a lot of people get it a little bit twisted too, where they imagine that we're saying that like no consequences for anything can ever occur, you know? It's like no sane person thinks that, you know? And like, so it's like, oh, like, so say we're in an organization and someone like, you know, grievously breaks the fucking code of conduct for the organization. Like, what, you're saying they could just like, nothing can happen? It's like, no, of course. Like, if, you know, if you're like a doctor and you get caught like, I don't know, like taking pictures of people when they're changing or something like that, it's like, you shouldn't be a fucking doctor anymore, you know? Like, you know, there should be consequences or something like that, you know? There's no reason why organizations can't have a code of conduct and enforce it. That's completely normal and fine. The question is, you know, whatever, somebody does some stupid, shitty thing that's awful, it's like, can they never, you know, like, I don't know, be in a band for ever again or something like that, you know what I mean? It's like, what does that have to do with anything? It's like consequences should be sort of like at least somewhat related to the fucking, like, the context in which something occurs, you know? It doesn't just mean that someone can't ever do anything ever again. Like, it doesn't make any fucking sense, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I think that if you're organizing and you want to make sure that people behave up to a certain standard, there's no reason why you can't have like a code of conduct and then enforce it, right? It's a completely normal thing to do. But then it gets into, we are an organization and we've heard that someone may have done something somewhere else at another time to some other people, and it's like, well, does that impact the organization in any way? You know, here's a question. And like, I don't know, I think about AA all the time as an example of this, you know? It's like, and we've used this example a bunch of times, like, on the podcast and stuff, but like, at AA, there's a treasurer of the meeting, you know, and they're responsible for the money because you have to pay rent for the places where you have meetings. Actually, I used to go to AA meetings for years downstairs in the basement here. And yeah, so the meeting has a treasurer. But, you know, AA is populated by alcoholics. Alcoholics have a tendency of getting drunk and doing crazy shit. And, you know, sometimes people get drunk and do crazy shit and steal the money that they're supposed to be holding on to, right? Because they need to get drunk. And the question is, like, what should be done with that person? Well, maybe they shouldn't be a treasurer anymore. But should they be banned from AA? No, clearly they need to fucking be there, right? And yeah, so like that's just an example of like the consequence sort of like making sense and being contextual to the like offense, right? But it doesn't mean that that person can't ever go to a meeting again, and it also doesn't mean that people should like, you know, basically do the equivalent of following that person around and being like, this guy stole our fucking money, you know? Because it's like, you know, that guy needs to get his shit together, and like it's pretty hard to get your shit together when people are following you around screaming at you, right? Like you need to be supported in that, and you need people to be like, well, that was pretty fucked up what you did. Let's talk about it, you know, like I'll see you at the meeting. But yeah, so I don't know, just wanted to put that out there too.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. There's often something when it comes to cancel culture in general, like I feel like I've been close to people that this has happened to, and without that fear of it almost happening to you, that some people fear even like, you know, you're about to write something online. You had brought up that example at some point in discussion another time, like people feel it when you're about to write something on Facebook. You're like, oh, I'm not going to. You know, it's gonna get too intense. And like, I'm wondering, like, how can people really understand some of its effect or how intense it is? Like, we're all active kind of participants in it while it's happening. Like, oh, have you heard that it all kind of happens that way? Or it used to be, and now it's like, hey, I understand it because I feel like it's happened. Some people understand it with personal experiences. Others have fears that it might happen, but it's like, I'm not sure how to make people realize like that there is something awful about it without putting them in a fearful situation. Like, I'm not sure how this message can go through without digging heels, you know? Yeah. If you have any solutions, this wasn't part of a question added, but it's things that we had discussed a bit that I feel like I don't know how to reach people like in that way, to open the discussion, because then there's also the fear of being alienated as well because of my opinions. It's like
I think part of the problem is that canceled people are not allowed to speak about what has happened to them. And so because of this, we don't actually know how bad it is. Because it's like, there's this constant refrain that cancel culture isn't really real. And we all know that it's like very controversial to talk about it. And so whenever it comes up, it's like pretty easily shut down. And canceled people, you know, they're being dehumanized, and so they're not really allowed to speak about their experience, and anytime they try to, people just attack them for it, and they're like, you're causing further harm by speaking about this, right? And so because of this, the stories of canceled people do not reach a wide audience, and people don't actually know or believe how bad it is. But I do think that people, if you are in leftist world, you might have a slight low-grade paranoia or fear that is following you around when you're witnessing this type of thing. And I believe that that is true because of how quickly people will jump ship when someone's being canceled. Because they're basically like, I don't want this to happen to me, so I'm just gonna like keep a safe distance, right? But we don't look that closely at it. And so like, I would like us to, because the only way to experience empathy is to actually try to put ourselves into somebody else's shoes, right? And like what you're saying, Jess, is you're being like, okay, like for those of us who either have been canceled or who someone we love has been canceled, any mythology about cancel culture not being real is quickly shattered. Like once that's happening to you or someone that you love, you understand how real it is and how serious it is, and how it doesn't matter if the accusations are totally false, it doesn't matter if it's totally like a total misrepresentation of what happened, it doesn't matter, and there's nothing that you can do to defend yourself or to slow it down or to change it. People have this fantasy where they're like, you know, I would be accountable. So like if it happened to me, I would just be accountable, right? So then therefore, you know, you don't have to worry about it. If you're just accountable, it'll be fine. And I just want you to know that accountability is the ever receding dot that like moves further and further away from you the closer that you try to get to it, okay? You can't be accountable. It's not possible to be accountable under cancel culture. And I will just give you one example of this because I want you to know that I literally hold the stories of hundreds of canceled people inside my brain, okay? But like, because they all message me and they tell me. But, so this is a true story. I'll tell it anonymously. A young queer person, 22 years old, went on a date, had sex with their date, thought everything was fine, and then afterwards, the date said it was not consensual. The person who went on the date thought that it was at the time, and immediately was like, oh my God, I am so sorry. Like, I never intended to cross your boundaries, and I will do whatever it takes to be accountable, because this person was a true believer in accountability and believed in this stuff. So it was like, whatever you want. So some of the demands were that they had to leave the job that they currently had and no longer work there. They did it. They left the entire industry that they were working in. They could no longer go to any of the events that their accuser went to. They said fine, they didn't go to any of the events. They laid low, they continued on with their life. A few years passed. They started a TikTok. They're like 22, that's what 22-year-olds do. And their TikTok really blew up because they're charismatic, and it was like they made funny videos. So their TikTok got very popular. And so once that happened, people were like, hey, this is like a person who has caused harm, who is now getting attention on the internet. This is not right. And so there was a demand that they publicly hold themselves accountable. What that meant was that they needed to take part in a public Instagram Live accountability process in which they had to admit to the harm that they had caused on camera, live. This was watched by 100,000 people, okay? This 22-year-old on camera, I watched it. This 22-year-old was like, I am very sorry, I have breached consent, and I am very sorry. And the person interviewing them was like, say it, you're a rapist, say it. And the person said, I'm a rapist. This person is also black. This was in the summer of 2020 when we were all having our awakening around police violence and racism. And this insane cancellation campaign literally got a young black person to admit to a very serious criminal act on camera, which could seriously fuck up this person's life, right? The person literally left the country because of the amount of harassment that they were experiencing and because their cancellation was so profoundly, like, viewed by 100,000 people, right? I contacted them. I talked to them on the phone. They only wanted to talk to me on the phone because they didn't want to have anything in writing because they were so fucking paranoid of people screenshotting every single thing that they say. And they're fucking traumatized, severely traumatized from what has happened to them. And what has happened to them is wrong. It's wrong. So I just tell that story because it's a very extreme one, but I want you to see how that person did everything that was asked. Every single thing that was asked, up to and including things that were entirely inappropriate to ask, the person said, yes, I will do it, I want to be accountable. And accountability was a dot that forever receded into the distance. They were not able to be accountable, and they were never allowed back into social life. They literally live in Mexico now, like in a small town. That's true. So, I don't know.
I think it's good to see how that process can unfold sometimes with experiences, and since y'all are experts in some way, shape, or another with this topic, with the topic of compassion, understanding what it means. Oh yeah, this is really a lot louder. Thanks, sorry again. Yeah, it's really nice to hear the examples that I brought forward. It brings life to these concepts that we kind of throw around and are discussing today in terms of like real people's lives. Bring it right back. Before we possibly open the floor for questions, is there anything else you'd want to add that maybe we didn't have time to broach today? Take a moment.
I wanted to maybe ask how you guys felt about doing this event and what it brought up for you in the lead up.
I'm not ready.
You're not ready? Well, it's scary. It's actually very frightening to talk about these things. I sometimes think that people think that I just have no fear at all, but I do have fear, and I'm very frightened a lot of the time. When we were on tour and we did, like however many events across the United States talking about this, like every single time we were super fucking anxious that something was gonna go down, right? Something terrible was gonna happen, or people were gonna scream at us, or like, who knows, right? And fortunately, not too much happened, but at our Portland event,
Obviously.
yes, somebody ran in and threw a stink bomb into the space before it started, and then they ran away. So we were like, okay, we're gonna do the event, and it was like very well attended, and there was a lot of great discussion, and
Little old church ladies came in and cleaned the church that we were doing the event in.
yeah, so it's absolutely terrible, but it was actually, it's Portland, so it was like our best attended event of the entire tour because it's like Portland's a very cancel-y city, so there was like tons of people there, lots of queer canceled people. And then we had a great time, and then we went back to my car to find my tires slashed and shit poured all over my car, right? So these people literally, like, drove around, because I actually parked my car several blocks away from the venue because I was like, this is Portland, people are gonna fuck with my car. But I have Quebec plates, and people knew that I was on tour, and they drove around looking for Quebec plates, slashed my tires, and poured literal shit on my car, okay? So I'm not really sure. It's very stressful to be treated this way. It sucks, actually. I hate it. I don't like being treated this way. And I find it bizarre that people who are constantly claiming that I'm causing harm by spreading a message of like human compassion think that they're doing activism by slashing my tires and pouring shit into the air vents of my car, right? And so I have to be honest, when I do this work, I'm filled with stress and anxiety. Like, I don't love it. It's very scary. But I do it anyway because I believe that it's the right thing to do, and I believe that it's important and necessary work, and somebody has to do it. So I guess it might as well be us. But it's not fun. And so I really do appreciate the courage of everybody who's willing to come out and like at least be here for this conversation. And I also encourage people to find their courage and try to talk about this, you know, in your lives with people who might be more on the fence, who are like, oh, isn't that just like a bunch of abuse apologism? Like, try to have this conversation. And if we do that, we can begin to shift the culture to something more compassionate. And that is why I put up with people slashing my tires.
Yeah, I was also like quite stressed out by doing this event, because who knows, you know? But it's actually, like, I was really looking forward to it too, and I'm really happy that we were able to do it. It's nice to be able to do events in Montreal, where there is a strong base of extremely pro-cruelty leftists, I guess, I don't know. And yeah, so it's cool to be able to talk to all of you about this and be able to, like, I don't know, just kind of do it in our home turf, so to speak. And I'm really, really excited by the fact that C is taking an active stance about it, you know, because it's quite rare, actually, for left-wing organizations to explicitly name the phenomenon and then have a stance about it, you know. You're you know, realistically, for a lot of these organizations, they're existing in circumstances where you can't name it, you know, without getting in like an enormous amount of trouble. And so it's very brave. And also, apart from being brave and apart from just being something that I agree with, you know, intellectually, I think it's strategically really important to be able to say that this is a thing that happens. It's very destructive, like both to individuals but also to our capacity to organize. It's very alienating to like 99% of normal people who are like, what the fuck are you talking about? Yeah, so I think strategically it's a really good move for left-wing organizations to finally sort of be like, yeah, we actually, like, we know what this is and we're not going to accept it as like a norm in our organization, you know? I think it's a cool step forward, so props.
Yeah, I was also really excited to see that C's wanted to host this event. I also feel fear. Yeah, I keep on feeling fear. I was afraid before, I'm afraid during, I'll probably be afraid after. Probably make some infographics about fear. There's a lot of psychological literature I've been meaning to get into for that. But like, yeah, you know, I wrote a book I published a book 5 years ago called I Hope We Choose Love. And I was like, after I publish this book, that'll be it for me. I'm going to retire from public life, which, you know, didn't happen, the retirement, because I also was like, this book is going to be, like, at some part of it, I didn't really think this was going to happen, but some part of me was like, I'm going to write this book called I Hope We Choose Love, and everyone in activist spaces is going to be nicer to one another. And also, like, all the terrible things that I, saw happen are going to stop happening, which is like a ridiculous thought to have. Like, it's a deep narcissism, really. When that book came out, surprise, surprise, activist culture did not like automatically become paradise. And I spent some time making this joke. People would ask me, like, what's your book about? What makes you so hopeful that we're going to choose love? And I'd be like, the title is I Hope We Choose Love, not I Think We'll Choose Love. And then I kept on joking for a while that, like, I was going to write a book called You Didn't Choose Love. Or You Should Have Chosen Love. Or You'll Wish You'd Chosen Love. All of those jokes are like kind of like about like this like deep despair that I feel a lot about like the world that we live in, but also I keep being hopeful. And I'm really excited that, like, I don't know, like 100 of you are here to talk about this, because I think I still hope we choose love. So that's how I'm feeling about this.
Thank you. If you want to get a moment to applaud all of our guests today. So great. So we have maybe a bit of time for questions, so we'll open the floor. I just wanted to kind of preface, it seems like we have a lot of really warm, fuzzy faces, but in general, if ever there's things, we invite diversity of opinions on things. Just keep it to maybe having a discussion around ideas and not specific people and whatnot, so just opening the floor with that.
Can I also just ask that people actually ask questions and,
Yeah,
and not just
go
make
on.
statements about what they think?
Yeah, do you want to maybe, we'll go here.
Marcus has the mic.
Okay, I
over
was
there.
wondering. Sorry, thank you. Perfect. Microphone's coming to you.
I just had a question about neurodiversity and like my context. I'm neurodivergent. I don't perform emotions and I'm not neurotypical, so people can say you're heartless or you're not showing humanity or you're not being empathetic, but my actions are often generous or whatever, but I can appear cold. So there can be a kind of, it's not necessarily a cancelling. I will self-exile when I'm not able to perform the way I'm supposed to in activist circles or whatever. So my actions are actually coming from a place of empathy and compassion, but I'm judged as not performing niceness or empathy or emotions in the right way. So I'm interested in what you'd have to say about the sort of ableist side of it, which also impacts on class and things, as you've been mentioning, and thank you. And I think cancel culture impacts on disabled people and neurodivergent people too. So I just wanted to bring that in and have your sort of responses. And learning from crip culture in terms of like, well, we're all as messy as fuck. We're all just like, we all hurt each other. We all mess things up. Some of us have trouble with intimacy and some of us don't perform the way we're supposed to. And how does that fit in with ways of building new things? So just an invitation to respond to that.
Thanks.
This is a really interesting question. I think social justice culture in general like has enormous amounts of like lore and like rules that only some of which are written down. And many of them are just sort of like complex social dynamics that you have to hold in your head, you know, and can often take an enormous amount of work to like learn properly too and to become fluent in. So I think that often ends up being exclusive for people who don't have a lot of access to education, not always, but it is a factor. Or I could say that it's much easier for people who are highly educated to start learning all of these like complex rules and stuff, but also for people who are neurodivergent and struggle with trying to interpret sort of like implicit social cues and stuff like that. It can be like absolutely like mind-bending to try to figure out why you're getting in trouble or someone's getting in trouble when you're like, I don't know, like I checked the rules and it seems like they followed the rules or whatever, you know? And I think it's a major difficulty for people actually. Yeah, I do think that often people on the autism spectrum can struggle a lot with this and are, I think, disproportionately at the receiving end of ostracization campaigns as a result. It's one factor among many that can sort of like impact people. And to be very cynical, many cancellation campaigns are effectively like a form of like popularity politics, you know? And like the kinds of people who are more able to, let's say someone like calls them out. Like some people are able to kind of turn it around, do a reverse Uno fucking call out, you know? And that's, that's a strategy that people use. And one of the things that is most likely to let you get away with that is having a ton of social capital, right? Like that's the truth. And it can be very difficult for some people to like accumulate that kind of social capital, right? So that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah, I really agree. I think that there's like sometimes there's like a very strange conflation in activist subcultures of etiquette with safety, which is like, to me, like a symptom of like a very bourgeois way of thinking. And there's this like, the kind of idea is that if we don't perform etiquette, then we are unsafe to be around. And ability to like catch an etiquette, like to understand an etiquette immediately and then perform it with like skillfulness is like an ability-based thing. It's like a neural like ability-based thing. So I think it's really important. I also am thinking about when I was first starting training as a social worker, I spent a lot of time working in group homes for adults who were disabled or adults with disabilities. These are adults who had like a high level of like visible neurodiversity, like folks with like high level cognitive impairment, folks who are very, very visibly autistic. And my sense actually is like folks who are visibly disabled in that way and many other ways as well have been like canceled before cancel culture existed. Because of like the behaviors or like the like body expressions that are read as unsafe by the dominant culture, like somebody who is speaking very loudly on the subway to people that other folks can't see, that is considered unsafe, even though it's not. Like actually, that in itself is not unsafe. Somebody stimming in public is considered unsafe. It's also not unsafe. And so, you know, I think this is like an old thing, and I appreciate what you're saying about like disability culture, like holding an awareness of this, because I think there's something so important here about like acknowledging that people who are behaving in ways that are unfamiliar to us, that are uncomfortable for us to watch, or like don't jive with our idea of like what is like the proper way to be around other people, does not mean that they are unsafe necessarily.
Great. Were there other questions? There's a hand there and then here. Over here, there's a striped shirt, a person with a striped shirt.
Hi. First of all, I think I want to say I'm sorry for the amount of harassment you've experienced. I think it's like beyond unfair. And yeah, I'm really sorry for these things to happen. And yeah, also Kai Cheng, as a transsexual, I think a lot of what you said today spoke to me in great ways. And I need all of the eccentric, mentally ill transsexuals to stick around because we need each other. That being said, I think, so the book you wrote is called I Hope We Chose Love, and the podcast is called Fucking Cancelled. I find that there's a difference in the language that's being used in both of these work. I do find that the podcast, or the language around Clementine and Jay's work, I do find it to be polarizing and provocative and inflammatory. And I find that it actually defeats the purpose of building solidarity. And I find a dissonance between the message and the way it's being said. And so, Kai Cheng, you also spoke about your process after the publishing of your book and all the new titles you would like to give to it. So, to me, I found the combination. I see the relationship between both of the work, but I also see like a dissonance in the way it's been delivered. So I think, Kai Cheng, on your end, I was wondering if
could we move towards? Oh yes.
Yes, I was wondering if there's an evolution in like how your approach to the matter, and I guess Clementine and Jay, I was wondering if you have any comments to make. Like, obviously, I just want to hear your perspective on this. Yeah.
So I don't know if you know this about me, but I say the word fuck a lot. So I have a zine series that's called Fucking Magic. I have a book that's called I almost said I Hope We Choose Love.
Plagiarize it.
Sorry, Kai Cheng. You can't own the fucking stars. And so basically, when Jay and I were making the podcast and we were deciding what to call it, we were like, should we call it Fucking Cancelled, or would that be like way too on the nose because I have fuck in the title of like a significant amount of my work. So part of it was that it was a joke, but also there is a long history in queer culture of people reclaiming language that has been used against them, that has been used as a slur to dehumanize them. So as a queer person, queer, we just use that word now. Queer used to be a slur. And there were queer people who wanted to reclaim that, and there were other people who were gay who didn't want to use that word because it was divisive, because they felt like it was inflammatory and divisive to use language like queer because they wanted to make their appearance more normal, and they wanted to assure people that they could be included in regular society. And then there were others who were like, actually, I am a fucking queer, and I want to use that language because what people have been saying about me, what they have been attacking in me, is something that I love about myself. And so in a similar way, I do claim being fucking canceled, because to be canceled is to be thoroughly dehumanized. And so I do want to use the word, and it's a word that you're not allowed to use. People constantly say that cancel culture doesn't exist. And so how do you talk about your experience when people say that what is happening to you doesn't exist? It can't happen, right? Because there's no word for it. Canceled is the word. That's the word that has come organically out of social justice culture. First it was called call-out culture, and then people got more serious about it, and they started calling it cancel culture. And it's actually an accurate term, because you're not supposed to be able to cancel a human being. You're only supposed to be able to cancel like a subscription. But cancellation is dehumanizing. It erases people's right to empathy, and it denies them their humanity. And so that is why it is possible to cancel a human being, because you're dehumanizing them. And so it's very important for me to use the language of cancel culture, despite the fact that people find it to be inflammatory, or despite the fact that people find it to be divisive, because it is the accurate term. And I say fucking canceled because it's an important part of my approach to politics to speak in a natural, normal way, which includes swearing a lot, which includes being, I don't know, it's just who I am. I swear, I'm a punk, I don't know. And so, yeah, fucking canceled. And I don't know if you've actually listened to the podcast, but if you listen to the podcast, we are incredibly and intentionally empathetic and compassionate to cancelers. We work very hard all the time to remind people that the goal of our work is not to turn cancelers into a new enemy, and it is not to dehumanize cancelers. And in fact, there's this thing called the dirtbag left, which is basically a bunch of socialists who started being kind of critical of social justice culture. And it's cool, the work that they were doing was cool. But the thing is that they're not from inside this culture, and so they can only critique it from the outside. Jay and I are from inside the culture. We are queer people, and we are from the heart of social justice culture, and so a huge purpose of our podcast is actually to talk to people inside the culture, specifically queer people and other activist-y types, and to help them with the process of thinking through these things. So it's true, the title is probably shocking for people and causes them a bit of dissonance, and then we invite them to sit with that and to actually listen to what we are saying, which is a message of compassion.
Yeah, I'm definitely not going to apologize for using fuck in the title of something. I think that, as Clementine said, we try to be very judicious, careful, and calm in the way that we speak about these topics. I think that sometimes just clearly naming something for what it is can be seen as inflammatory by people who are really invested in it. But I would say that that's their problem, and in terms of, the content that we try to put out, especially if you listen to the podcast, we try really, really hard to just be very clear, calm, and collected about it, We're not trying to start shit with anybody, we're just trying to talk about something that's happening.
I hope we choose love. I think is emblematic of my public persona and the person I try to be in the world. I love the practice of doing love, which I think of as refusing to dehumanize and getting very, very close to the humanity of people who are really different from me, have really different perspectives. you know, there are a lot of skills, there are a lot of values, a lot of principles that go into that, and I also don't do it very well a lot of the time. Like, your public persona and my actual life are sometimes different. Shocking. But I think there have been many, there are many gifts that have come with that practice. And no, I don't think I have changed from that. Like, I also put out a book recently, it was called Falling Back in Love with Being Human. It's on brand for me. But really, I am very curious about this practice of leaning into the truths of people I disagree with. And that's true, actually, for people who practice call-out culture or cancel culture. I hope to have modeled that today, actually. Really thinking about the deepest truth that drives the behavior that we don't like. Have I evolved? I mean, in so much as a person can evolve in 5 years, yeah. I think the evolution is really trying to become braver about practicing what I was already saying I wanted to practice, which is really about having the conversation in more ways with more people who are doing it differently than me, because that's what I care about. I hope that makes sense.
We'll have time for one more question. You had your hand up already. So there's someone with a green sweater right here. Yeah. Or maybe we can just take both questions quickly and answer both. Do you think that's possible?
I'll be fast. Just first, a quick thanks. As somebody who was really entrenched in these cancel-y spaces in social justice culture here, to see people speaking about this, and especially an English university organization putting their name on an event like this, that gives me so much hope. So just wanted to say that. But also the question, what advice would you give to somebody who is being canceled?
We'll just there's one more question here, because that'll be the last ones at the same time. Right here in the front, you had your hand up. Just as the last other hand I saw, and then that'll be all. We'll stay around.
I guess it's kind of in the same place, but so I'm an educator, like a teacher, and I don't know if y'all heard recently, but there was a teacher in Quebec recently that was canceled for coming out as non-binary. It was a whole thing. Their job was threatened. Basically, it kind of feels like, specifically in such a cancel-y province, like you guys talked about, and such a transphobic province in general, it feels like sometimes you're fighting an uphill battle. You have all of these ideas, you want to be the change and all of that, but the risk that comes with it is so high. It's your job, your career, your community. So it's just also, what advice do you have for canceled people? Yeah, but also, what advice do you have for how to build a solid community and a sense of people who are going to back you up when you live in a society that does not back you up? The administration did not back that person up. They don't back me up when I want to teach the students a specific thing that's not, especially with all the protests around queer people and stuff. So it's just, advice around building a community that will help you through things like that as well, and make it feel like you're not fighting that battle by yourself.
Yeah, it's actually complementing question, because it looks at kind of both sides. Yeah.
Well, my first advice to canceled people is do not make a statement. That's my first advice. There's a lot of pressure when you're being canceled to immediately go online and make a statement. This is just practical advice. I'm speaking to the canceled people or the soon-to-be canceled people in the room. So basically, there's this thing when you really believe that all I have to do is be accountable, it's gonna be okay if I just be accountable. There's this huge pressure on people in real time to make a statement. And often people will make statements in which they take responsibility for things that they aren't actually responsible for. And then that comes back to haunt them later because they've now said it, right? The other thing is that there can be a situation in which you're being canceled, but you also know that you did do something wrong, right? And so people in that case will be like, okay, well, I did something wrong, I do want to be responsible. So my knowledge about being responsible when you've done something wrong comes out of the 12 steps. And in the 12 steps, we do this whole thing where we look at our behavior, we look at our part, we take a lot of time to think about it, to talk about it with someone we trust, we figure out why it is that we did what we did, like what is the surrounding like context of that behavior. We change the behavior in a consistent and ongoing way, and then we make direct amends to people wherever possible. At no point in this do we publish on the internet the worst things that we've ever done, okay? I do not advise it. I think that it's not the business of the internet, your own personal process of becoming responsible. So even if you did do something that you regret, I think that you have the right to privacy in the process of working through that with a therapist, maybe a sponsor, and then making amends to the people that you hurt. If you did not do the things that you were accused of, do not say that you did. It's not a good idea, and people will often do that because they hope that it's gonna go away, but it is actually gonna make it worse. So that's just like some practical advice, because people always feel like they should make a statement and just don't make a statement. Secondly, it's like your mental health is probably totally fucked when that's happening. So it's like a harm reduction situation of like, you need to get as much support as you possibly can. You should get off social media. You should like possibly change your password and have your friend have the password so that you're not looking at it. And you should surround yourself with whoever's left who's actually trustworthy in your life. If you don't have a therapist already, get a therapist. Talk to the therapist immediately about cancel culture to make sure that they actually are competent in being able to help you with this process and aren't gonna like weirdly like victim blame you for what's happening to you. And you know, we actually have a couple zines here for sale, and one of them is called Surviving Cancellation, which is basically just about the process of surviving cancellation. But like one of the most important aspects of it is you need to focus on what is in your control and not obsess over things that are not in your control. Because canceled people will spend so much time in their head trying to be like, how can I control this? How can I stop this? How can I make this not be happening? And the thing is that you don't have control over the fact that it's happening, but what you do have control over is like taking care of yourself and trying to surround yourself with people who love you and, you know, finding other people. And if you aren't canceled yet, you can do a great service to yourself by building community now with people who reject cancel culture, so that when your day comes, you already have friends who are not going to abandon you. And so I really advise that. Like, I honestly am kind of in the school of thought of like pre-cancel yourself. Because if you do that, if you actually just come out and say, I reject cancel culture, I am not into dehumanizing people, then yeah, the canceling people in your life are gonna start getting mad at you and canceling you, but you're gonna find other people who share the same values as you, and you're gonna build strong, trustworthy friendships that will actually stick by you if you do get canceled.
Yeah, and I think like trying to remain in your integrity is really important. You know, there's so much pressure to to say you did things that you didn't do, or to, you know, there's also a lot of internal pressure to freak the fuck out and like try to get people to stop saying what they're saying and like whatever, but they're not going to. You know, you can't convince people who believe what they believe. It's practically impossible, at least in my experience. You know, some people try to go like a legal route, but that like rarely works very well either. And I wanted to sort of briefly speak to what you were saying, that like, you know, like a person who, let's say, is being like ostracized and being like really mistreated because they're, you know, because of their fucking identity, right? Like this is like a completely insane fucking thing, and it bothers me so much that like we still even have to like talk about this kind of thing, but it fucking does happen, right? And you know, that person needs to remember that like just being themselves or whatever like is fine and good, and that they are in their integrity, you know. And this is the thing, it's like when people are mistreating you, you have to remember that you're being mistreated, you know. Like if people are treating you with cruelty, like it's not you're not making anyone be cruel to you, you know. People are choosing to do that, and so don't blame yourself, you know, for other people's actions. It doesn't help. Try to surround yourself with supportive people if possible. You know, it's like really the most important thing.
I like the practical advice. Like all the advice. I think, I guess like a couple pieces to add are like, this is not like a direct answer to the question, but like just to like notice like the mechanism through which like social shunning happens is like replicated like across the political spectrum. Like when people are shut out transphobically from their jobs and their professions, like that is like a form of cancel culture. And it's just a really, really interesting, I think, to notice like how like the right will say, we oppose cancel culture unless they like who's doing it, right?
Totally.
And this is like a thing, like it's not just about the right, like we always hate dehumanizing behavior until we want to dehumanize somebody. And like almost universal example of that in many cultures is like horrific jokes about prison rape that we make. Like, we always hate sexual assault until it happens to somebody in prison. And like, this is like a horrifying thing. And like, maybe if we were to turn that into advice, like that might be like a litmus test. Like, it's like looking for like, how does dehumanization happen, like on a casual level, in like our social interactions, and like maybe we push back against them, or maybe we listen for who's pushing back against them and like make friends with those people, A deep piece of advice that I have not followed in my life is like, don't have friends that you are afraid of. And like, I think that is like really like a really important thing to do, like just like to check, like, am I afraid of my friends actually? Like, and then I guess like on a really like individual level, most of us have a lot of shame. Like we just have a lot of shame and just in general. Raise your hand if you have a lot of shame. Yeah. Something that's super painful about public humiliation is it triggers the story inside of us that says that we're bad and don't deserve love and we hurt the people that we love. And I think really like a secret about dehumanization is that it's actually surprisingly easy to not dehumanize other people, and it's very easy to dehumanize yourself. And like if we always keep coming back to like a question of like, how do I practice believing that I am always worthy of love and capable of loving other people well? Like how do I put that into actions every day? Maybe something changes for us.
Wow, it's a great last sentence to say. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. As Clementine mentioned, it's being brave, and for all of you individually, Lesoleil, Clementine Morrigan, and Kai Cheng Thom. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
The room is going to stay open. Logistical question. The room is staying open for a little bit. Yeah? So the room is staying open for a little bit if y'all want to stay around, talk a little bit to some of the people around here. Sounds good.
There we go. We have some zines and stickers over there if you want to buy them. I recently lost my job, so.
Pity party, let's do it. No, it's good literature too, so great.